Xavier Cano. Welcome to Lucid Commons.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy that you are here. Tell us, who is Xavier Cano?
It's so interesting. I think as time has passed by, I'm thinking it more around like a story as opposed to an actual like label. When you think about labels, I am an industrial engineer. I'm an MBA. I'm a father. I'm a leadership coach. But it's interesting because when you think about the story behind it, yes, my learnings in academia were industrial engineering, MBA, but through my story, which I'll share a little bit later, I became a leadership consultant. And so I speak to corporate clients all over the Fortune 500 on how to optimize your mind, how to optimize human performance. And so that's what I do today.
Okay, what do you enjoy about that work? I want to hear a little bit about how you got there. How did you get to leadership consulting?
So it's interesting because I had different transformational experiences throughout my entire life in different roles that I had in different personal experiences. But there was one that really showed me that, while this is exactly where you're supposed to be. And so what happened is that I had just graduated with my MBA. The year was 2010, and the country was going through the financial crisis. And so it was an interesting time period, but I was lucky. I had a job upon graduation, which was not the norm during that time period. And it was with Bank of America, specifically in their home loans division. And so what was neat is that I was now working on projects to essentially help the country get back to some form of stability. And so it was great. I had a great manager, a supportive team. The projects, again, were high visibility. And I did a good job. I was making a huge difference. But during that time period, I also started to make observations. And I think this is what we all do. We all start to compare ourselves to other people. And when I started this new journey, I started with 10 other people, other MBA graduates. And, after a couple of years, I saw that some of them were getting promoted, and then another year passed, there were more that were getting promoted, and then a year passed, there was a group that was getting promoted, and I realized, wow, like I haven't gotten promoted yet. Like what's going on here? And so I started to doubt myself. I started to think, is there something wrong with me? Am I not doing something right? I mean, my projects are getting a lot of attention. I'm getting great results. What's going on here? And so it was interesting because after almost 6 years of being the last person who had not gotten promoted yet, I decided to talk to a coach because I thought I must not be doing something correctly. And that coach essentially told me, you're actually doing everything correctly except managing your mind. And I had no idea what she was talking about because during that time period, I actually did not see the correlation between having health issues tied to stress. I didn't think that a headache was being caused by being stressed out. I just didn't know. And many people don't know that, although I think a lot of people now are figuring that out. And so she told me, you're not managing your mindset. And I asked her, what do you mean? And she said, well, number one, you have all these limiting beliefs about yourself. You have negative emotions that you haven't managed. And it was interesting because one of the limiting beliefs that she said I had was that I felt like I wasn't enough. And even though no one had ever told me that before, it's almost like that went right through me. It's almost like the soul recognized that what she was saying was true. And it hit me. And I had to think about it. And after just a couple of minutes, I knew exactly why I felt that way. I knew the circumstances that were contributing to that. And in the same way, I was able to get that power back. And by the end of that session, I was able to say very clearly, I am enough. I am enough. And I knew it. I knew it, and I knew exactly why had been thinking that way. And so I fixed it. Well, within 6 weeks of that conversation, I was promoted. And so that really took me by surprise because then I realized you can have all of the degrees in the world. You can have all of the certificates, the certifications. You can even have the network. But if you are telling yourself these stories about yourself that aren't true, that in itself can be the only thing keeping you back from succeeding in some aspect of your life or in your career. And so I knew at that point that I would eventually be teaching people these concepts, of which at that point I wasn't 100% sure of what they all were. I just knew that, hey, this is a thing, this is a space of learning. And so I continued working with this coach for the next 2 years. And she taught me several techniques on how to remove limiting beliefs, how to remove negative emotions from memories, how to structure your words such that you're increasing the chances of having successful outcomes. And I started using them. And as I started using them, I started to see how I was getting better outcomes in the things I was doing on an everyday basis. And I decided then to start working with some other coaches as well, integrating other concepts. And before you knew it, I was certified as a coach. I was a certified life coach, a certified master life coach. I became a certified ICF coach, which is the International Coaching Federation. And after about 6 years of that experience, I made a decision to start my own company as a leadership coach, where I predominantly teach concepts tied to mindset and how having tools can actually allow you to have better business results. You can have better business results. You can have better results on your team. You can be a better manager. You can be a better individual contributor. And again, it's not just limited to your career. You can also use it in your life to have better relationships, to feel healthier, to feel happier. And that's what I do now. I've been doing this now for about 3.5 years. And during this time period, I've had a chance to speak in front of 20,000 people in India, which was
Wow.
amazing. I've spoken to over 15 companies in the Fortune 500 list, 25 others companies as well. I've spoken to academic institutions, to nonprofits, through workshops and leadership programs, and a few keynotes as well. And so it's been great. But that's how I came about in becoming a leadership coach, because I realized that leadership is not limited to just gaining traditional skills on managing people, but how to actually create better outcomes by managing your mind.
That's incredible. I want to dwell on that because I want to hear a little bit more about what it actually felt like to understand the narrative that you were telling yourself, I am not worthy, right? Because if it was as simple as us just flipping a switch and shifting our mindset and saying, oh, well, I'm worthy now, right? And just going forth and achieving everything that you've ever wanted to achieve. I think it's a lot harder than that. So I'd love to hear more about the headspace that you were in, what you were feeling, going through that journey of realizing, oh, the narrative that I've been telling myself in my mind is that I'm not worthy, is that I can't have this, or I'm not worthy of a promotion, or I'm not worthy of success. What was that like for you?
It was an interesting journey because I didn't grow up hearing any of these concepts, and many people, especially in my generation, did not grow up hearing any of these concepts. And so I didn't realize that your upbringing has a lot to do with how you feel about yourself today. I didn't realize that there are limiting beliefs that have been essentially brought forth just through generations. And so from your great grandparents all the way down to you now, that there's been this limiting belief that has just been passed down and passed down and passed down and passed down. And when you're able to recognize where it's coming from, because you can see patterns, you can see that, you know what, I see that this is a limiting belief that I had, but I also see that my mom has this limiting belief, and I can now see that my grandmother had it too, or my grandfather. Then now you can break the cycle, because the truth is that if you have a child, you will pass it down to them as well if you're not careful. And I teach a lot of this in my workshops, that when you're a child, when you're a baby, you're a sponge. You're picking up everything in your environment and you're accepting it as true, even though it may not be true. And so to the extent that you can recognize that you may have picked up something that doesn't serve you now you have the opportunity to make a different decision. And it might not feel great at first because you've been wired that way. It's not part of your identity. And just through neuroscience, we know that anything that takes you out of your identity is not going to make you feel safe. And so now your amygdala starts to fire off, and you start to experience all of these stress responses, these hormones, and it makes it much more difficult to change. But when you realize that that change is exactly what you need to now become a better version of yourself, then it starts to become easier to accept that change. And there's other techniques as well that I teach around how you can accomplish that. But as part of my own journey, it was just fascinating to see how some of these limiting beliefs that I had, I was picking up from my own family. Now, to be fair, I mean, there were many beliefs I picked up from my family that actually was allowing me to be who I am today, right? And so there was a lot of positive things I picked up from my family. For example, my mom and dad always taught me never to settle for the status quo, right? And so there were a lot of positive things I picked up, but there were some things that I did pick up that were no longer serving me. The other thing I realized is that you can pick up something early in your life that is crucial, that keeps you alive, that keeps you happy, that keeps you sustained, and yet you now reach a new point in your life where you no longer need it. It actually now becomes a crutch. And so being able to recognize when that happens is crucial, because you'll have to be able to let it go if you want to continue to grow. And so as part of my own story, I had to learn how to recognize some of the things that I was holding on to that now were not helping me. I had to learn how to let those go. And now, I always tell people that letting things go is not as simple as saying, okay, I now let it go. Some of this involves speaking with other people, getting other people's perspectives, even talking to a therapist. And so there's a lot of tools you can use that you can, there's journaling, there's visualization, affirmations, again, working with a therapist on perhaps maybe doing some shadow work. But when you start that process, it makes it a lot easier. And so all of this is very much a process. And that's why I said at the very beginning that, when we say who we are, it's a label, but behind that label is an entire story, is a journey that allows you to become who you are today, and that will allow you to become who you will become in the future. And so for me, I spent the next 6 years really going through this transformation where I was shedding a lot of things, shedding a lot of beliefs that kept me back, things that I thought I needed to do that I actually didn't need to do. I'll share one of those. One of those was the concept of sharing what your boundaries are. What are your boundaries? We all have them. But sometimes we don't realize that we have the power to tell others that this is how I want to be treated. This is how I want to show up in this space. This is what I need to be happy. And I love it when I meet the 6-year-old, the 7-year-old, the 8-year-old that shares their boundaries with me. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I loved it every time that I saw her friends sharing boundaries with her. Mm-hmm. I didn't know I could do that. And so that's just one example of learning how to set your boundaries. And also learning how to advocate for yourself, knowing that you have needs as well. And so all of this has been very much part of my own journey. And as a coach, one of the things I tell other coaches is that the best coaches are the ones who are being coached on a regular basis. And whether I'm working with a sleep coach or a grief coach or a fitness coach or even a therapist, I actively work with coaches every single month on something different, because I continue to build on my skill set, on my toolkit. And so even though my journey has led me to where I am now, I'm still developing this part of who I am as a coach so that I can continue becoming better and better and better for my clients. For example, right now, you and I, we're taking this neuroscience class at Wharton. So getting a lot more skills around the power of neuroscience and achieving better business results. And I'm even taking an AI class for leaders at Harvard Business School online. And it's been fascinating. I mean, both of these courses have just been absolutely transformational. And so as part of my journey, it's about continuous improvement, absolute continuous improvement.
I love that. And what I'm hearing is you are somebody who has internalized and practiced a growth mindset. That is your default state. That's very clearly baked into your operating system. were you always that way, or was that one of the limiting beliefs that you had to shed? Were you somebody who was maybe stuck in a fixed mindset to some extent before you went on this growth journey?
Well, what's interesting is that even the individuals who have a growth mindset, they can find themselves stuck. And so to answer your question, I always had a growth mindset. I attributed that to both my mom and my dad, who always pushed me to be better and better and better. And then just by graduating with my degree in industrial engineering, you learn concepts around continuous improvement, Six Sigma, Lean. And I had an opportunity to gain additional training on those methodologies when I was working at Dell Technologies. And so my mentality from a career perspective and from a personal standpoint has always been around continuous improvement and having a growth mindset. But as you can see, even somebody like myself who has a growth mindset, and I had a growth mindset when I was at Bank of America, I was stuck because now I reached a point where I didn't know what else I needed in order to continue to grow. And so this is where coaching can be extremely valuable, because a coach is going to be able to see the areas in your life that are preventing you from moving forward. And that's what their job is, to make you a better version of yourself in whatever capacity that is. And so, yes, somebody with a growth mindset can absolutely become stuck. I became stuck. And through that experience that I had with that coach, I was able to become unstuck. And now I teach people how to do the same, how to become unstuck.
So you are someone who has that growth mindset, who is coachable. Have you ever worked with someone who is stuck in a fixed mindset or who is not yet coachable? How do you unlock? I think there's an element of humility there, right? You have to be willing to say, I need help. I need coaching. I need to seek out XYZ tools to help me move forward. So I'm curious on your work with certain individuals and just how you can shift someone from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset and get people to be coachable.
So the first thing I want to mention is that as a coach, it is not our jobs to change anybody. In fact, we don't have the capacity to change anybody. We can influence somebody else's decision, but every single one of us has the ability to say whether or not we want to change. And we own that is our right to be able to say if we're going to change or not. So as a coach, let's just be clear, I don't change anybody. What I do is I create a space where people have the opportunity to go through a transformation if they are ready to do so. And sometimes change can be slow. And sometimes it can be as fast as it was for me. Within 6 weeks of that conversation, I have my coach, I got my promotion. But for some people, it does take time because we're all different. We all have our own stories. We all have our own limitations. And sometimes we have to think about it slowly. And sometimes it is baby steps. And that's okay too. Baby steps are just fine. But the person who gets to a point where they realize I am no longer happy, things are not moving in the direction that I need them to, and I need help, those people are more than likely ready to listen. Because as a coach, I've had many people that weren't ready to hear what I had to say. And that was okay too, because those were the same people that came back a year later and said, you know what, I'm ready now. In fact, I've had certain coaches that told me something I needed to think about, and I wasn't ready. But then I came back a year later and said, I'm ready now. And that's okay. But for the person who is ready, I have a lot of techniques on how to begin to change somebody's identity. And by changing their identity, it's not about changing the essence of who they are. It's essentially allowing them to become a better version of themselves. And so I have a lot of techniques. Some simple ones are affirmations, visualizations. And then I have some more complex techniques, such as the mind wiping technique, which was created by Sarah and Jessica Meredith. The MFC method, Master Freedom Code, which is something that I'm working on right now with co-creator Vinnie Tolman. Those are a little bit more complex. But there's so many different methodologies on how you can start to change your identity so that you become the identity that you wish to be at a point in time. And so, but definitely want to mention that I don't change anybody. The person who's ready to experience the transformation, they will seek me out. I will offer them a space, an environment, a tool. They will do it on their own. they will change themselves on their own.
This concept of ready, I'm putting myself in the shoes of the listener, and if someone is wondering right now, oh gosh, do I need some transformation? Do I need an identity shift? Am I ready? How do I know when I'm ready? What does ready look like in your experience, right? What does ready look like? You've worked with clients who might have been ready, who might not have been ready. What does ready actually look like?
It's interesting because ready looks different for everybody. One of my observations is that a lot of times people will reach out to me because they're desperate. They've tried everything, they've done everything, they don't know where else to go. Those people are the ones that I consider being stuck, and they need the help. And so, I hear things like, I've been doing this over and over and over again, and it's just not working out. I've been trying this, I've been trying out, and nothing seems to work. And so, as a metaphor, I compare it to a hamster on one of these hamster wheels where they run around and they're running, but they're still in the exact same space. And so, I can typically tell somebody's ready because I'm essentially their last resort. But there's many people that I do help out, not only in coaching, but also in my workshops. And when I help people in these workshops, sometimes you have 20 people that are attending a live workshop or a virtual workshop. Sometimes you have 400 people. And really, them being there is not necessarily for them to go through a huge change and transformation that day, but it's essentially to plant a seed, right? It gives them something to think about. And as time goes by, whether it's a week or 2 weeks, they've been thinking about it, and now they're starting to make observations in their environment where they realize, you know what, now I'm actually ready for a conversation. And then there's people on these workshops that they go through the transformation during the workshop, and that's one of the most beautiful things. When you see somebody who at the very end raises their hand and they don't have a question, they have a comment, and they say, wow, I never realized that person you described in your workshop is actually me. I see it now. I can see how I was affected by it now. I can see how this specific event has guided my entire life. And now I know that I can change that. And you've given me some great tools, and I just want to thank you so much for that. And so you see it all. You see it all. And so for me, it's about seeing people go through that transformation in real time, but also about the people who come back to me a week, 2 weeks later, maybe a year later, and essentially tell me, wow, you planted that seed that has allowed me to be where I am right now.
What is that one seed that you aspire to plant into everyone that you coach or speak with?
The seed that I want people to know is that your mind is a lot more powerful than what you realize. And it wasn't until I took a neuroscience class last year that I was now able to explain the rationale behind it. And so, and just through the neuroscience class that we're taking right now at Wharton, I didn't realize how many different systems and functions and that you have in your actual brain and nervous system. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible how we're all designed. But the seed I want people to know is that, or that I want to plant in people, is so that they know that from a biological perspective, you have systems in your mind that will keep you exactly where you are right now. And so I tell people, you have something called the reticular activating system. That's what filters. That's it's like a filter. It allows things to come in and things not to come in. So that way your body doesn't go into sensory overload. And so that could mean things like picking up on certain colors, on certain patterns, but even on certain observations. You can have 10 people in the same room and they all hear a message from somebody completely different. That is because of your reticular activating system. You have been essentially wired to observe things and experience things in different ways because of your upbringing, because of your story, because of who you become. And when you recognize that, you will realize that you are filtering reality right now based on all of those experiences because that's how you're wired. And so if you want to experience life a little bit differently, or maybe notice opportunities that you never realized that you could experience, there are techniques that you can do on a daily basis to start seeing those. I love it when I do a very simple technique where I tell somebody to say the following: I've decided to have a feather within the next 3 to 7 days. You just gave yourself a command, You just told your reticular activating system what to look for. And I always love when I get that one person that says, wow, I didn't realize that that there's a vase filled with feathers in my office. I never noticed this vase with feathers until now. Or I never noticed that, somebody says, I've decided to have a crystal within the next 3 to 7 days. And then all of a sudden they notice that there's a little crystal sitting on their coffee table.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I was hoping for a concrete example of the reticular activating system because in my mind I had been taught, oh well, after you buy your car and say it's a red Honda, and all of a sudden you're seeing red Hondas everywhere, right? That's the reticular activating system because now it's relevant to you, right? It's something that you care about. You drive a red Honda every day, so naturally you're going to see them everywhere. That's a great example. I'd love to hear more about this concept, managing your mind. When we spoke the first time, you had said, well, no one ever taught me how to manage my mind. What do I mean, you went your whole life without learning to manage your mind. And this is one thing that I'm learning and practicing right now. I feel like we need to be teaching children, I mean, literally K through 12. Like, how is this not part of our education system? Raising and teaching people how to manage their mind and the power of mindset. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you actually learned to manage your mind. Like, what is that work? What does that practice look like for you?
Well, the good news is that when my daughter was in daycare, I noticed that they were doing yoga. And so I thought that was pretty cool. And they were talking about mindset principles, and even in first grade, second grade, third grade, they were already talking about mindset principles,
Wow.
like, saying positive things about yourself. And so
What
I thought it was
daycare is
pretty cool.
that?
Oh, I know. It was a children's courtyard here in Austin, Texas, where I
Wow.
live. I mean, it was great. And so that's the good news, that I am starting to see this more frequently. But my first exposure to managing my mindset was when I first decided to go to therapy. And I believe I think I was 34 or 30 or 35 years old. And I decided to go because I started to get a lot of anxiety because, again, I was observing all of my peers who had been promoted, from this MBA cohort, and I hadn't. And I just started giving myself anxiety because I didn't know why. I didn't know, like, is something wrong with me? Is something going on? I didn't understand. And so it was neat because the therapist had me read a book by Dr. David D. Burns called Feeling Good. And it was a great book. And there are many topics that are discussed, but one of the topics was around cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And I loved it because it was all around reframing. And that was the very first time ever that I had been taught on how to manage my mind. And so he talked a lot about what he calls cognitive distortions. One of them being catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is a state of mind where something happens and immediately your mind goes to the worst possible situation without there being evidence that that's even going to happen. And so you're thinking that the worst possible thing is going to happen, but yet if you take a step back and think about, has something like this ever happened to me? In other words, all the times that I catastrophized, that thing that I was catastrophizing about ever happened. And when I took the time to think about it, I told myself, wow, like at least 99% of the times that I thought about this, it never actually happened. And so therefore, I'm putting myself into this stressful mode, this panic mode, and then physiologically, my body's releasing all these stress hormones, cortisol, for something that never actually happens. And that's now my reality. And so by taking all of these tools that he was teaching, one of them being catastrophizing, the next time that I had an experience where I started to catastrophize, I said, stop. Everything is going to be great. I'm going to find an amazing solution. There's no need to worry. And literally within 5 minutes, everything in the environment resolved itself. Why does this happen? I couldn't explain it back then, but I can now because of the neuroscience courses that I participated in and the ones that you and I aren't together, but the amygdala. The amygdala is like the alarm center of the body. And so when that activates your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that's in charge of planning, of thinking things through, it shuts off. Mm-hmm. And so the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex have an inverse relationship. When you're thinking straight, you're planning, your amygdala is shut off. But when your amygdala turns on, your prefrontal cortex turns off. And now you're not thinking straight. You're not thinking clearly. And so one easy technique is to breathe. If you find your amygdala going off, meaning you're getting stressed out, you're getting upset, you're getting overwhelmed, breathe. In and out. In and out. That's a really simple technique I teach in my workshops. But another technique, like I was just mentioning, is be aware that you're now catastrophizing, because now that you're aware, you can now choose to reframe that into, you know what, I'm going to figure this out. And now immediately your prefrontal cortex is activated, your amygdala is going off, and now you're better suited to find a solution. Mm-hmm. And so that's been part of my training on how to manage my mind. And so through therapy around, reading the book, which was my first introduction into how to manage your mind, to learning about limiting beliefs, how do you manage those, learning about the impact of emotions on your decisions, being certified as a master life coach, an ICF coach. There's so many things I've learned along the way, that I have so many tools on how to essentially manage your mindset. And there's even a part that I haven't discussed, which is around owning your authenticity. When all of us are put in an environment where we're starting to question if we can be ourselves in that environment, we are lowering the opportunity of us being successful and being happy. Because the one thing I can tell you based on all of my learnings is that there's only one you. Everyone else is already taken. I know that's a saying that many people have heard before, and it's true. There's no room for anybody else. Everyone, you are unique. You are unique, you're irreplaceable, and you are here to share your gifts with the world. When you try to be somebody else, you're never going to succeed. And it's important that you recognize and honor your story. There's a reason why you were raised the way you were raised. There's a reason why you went through what you went through. It's very much tied now to why it is that you do. Now, when I talk to most people about this, they don't make the connection at first, but then after talking about it, they start to see, oh wow, now I know why it is that I work as a quality auditor at this healthcare company. Now I know now it is because my grandmother had an illness and she was at this hospital, and I was the one that went over there on a daily basis to check on her, and I was so impressed with the quality of care that I can now make the connection that this is why now I work as a quality auditor in a healthcare system. And they couldn't say that before. Now they can. And it's important to own that, because that is your gift to the world and is very much tied to your story. And so, imagine you go into a room and you have 20 women and you're the only guy. You might start thinking that you have to act a little bit differently. Or let's say that it's 20 men and you're the only woman. You might think that you need to act a little bit differently, but the truth is that you are there because you're meant to share your gifts with everybody else. And so as part of managing your mindset, it's also about understanding that your competitive advantage, your superpowers, are being able to be you, knowing that you are evolving with time as well.
I appreciate your perspective there, and it made me think of something that you mentioned earlier, which was shadow work. So is that something that you learned through Carl Jung's psychology and philosophy? Okay, because having this conversation about authenticity made me think about people, and I've experienced this as well, showing up in your professional role, showing up to work with your persona and how you think you should act, or how you think you should dress, or how you think you should speak, compared to your shadow self, right? Which is your true self, sometimes unexplored and buried for some. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, having done some of the shadow work yourself and helping professionals. You said you do corporate workshops, helping professionals show up more authentically in their professional roles, and what that looks like.
Absolutely. And so shadow work, I think it's a really important. I mean, shadow work essentially just means that you're working on that part of yourself that maybe can use some help. Maybe it's a part of yourself that you don't disclose. Maybe it's a part of yourself that you don't realize is there, that's creating maybe negativity in other people. It might be making other people feel uncomfortable. It might be the reason that you're feeling uncomfortable. And so it's taking the time to actually study it and do something with it. And so it's interesting because we all have these things. I'll give you an example. I was raised to be a perfectionist. I was in these classes when I was in elementary school where you had to be perfect. And I think for many people in my generation, that's essentially what it was. You took a quiz, you took a test, and you had to be perfect. 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 In other words, there was never a quiz that measured how successful I am in aligning to who I am. I never took that quiz or test in high school or in college. I never took that quiz in elementary school. Instead, we're assessed on these skills that a school system believes are critical. And look, many of these are critical. Many of these skills are absolutely critical. The ability to do math, the ability to read, the ability to write, the ability to express your ideas. And so there's a level of skill that I think everyone needs. But this is something that we're not necessarily measured on. And so now as a leadership coach, I do introduce workshops where you now have the opportunity, if you're ready, to look within and ask yourself, is there something that I'm doing or not doing that is part of this shadow side of me that if I address it, I can become a better version of myself? And I'll give you an example. And this is an actual client of mine. I've changed her name. And many of the examples, all of the examples actually that I give in my workshops, I've changed their name, I've changed their gender so they're not recognizable. But I give them as examples. And so Bethany, she was selected to be part of this evening MBA program that her company was sponsoring. And so she applied for it and they accepted her. And so now her company is paying for her entire evening MBA program. Well, a week before the program, she started to get a lot of anxiety. She started to question herself. Am I smart enough? Can I really do this? Am I going to struggle? Am I going to feel stupid in the classes? And she pulls out like a day before she's supposed to start. And she feels so guilty because this is an opportunity that she just turned down. Well, when her and I had a chance to work together on what happened, because she came to me because she wanted to, be able to remove this anxiety and feel comfortable about herself, we learned that it was coming from a childhood experience. That when she was younger, her mom used to refer to Bethany as the outgoing sister, and her mom would refer to her sister Sarah as the smart one. And so the conversation was always, Bethany's the outgoing one and Sarah's the smart one. Oh, Bethany's the outgoing one and Sarah's the smart one. Bethany's the outgoing one and Sarah's the smart one. And now her mind has been programmed to believe that she can't be both. And now it's affecting her in her everyday life because she just turned down this evening MBA program. And so that's an example of working on your shadow, because now you're taking a look at the things that are causing you to feel uncomfortable, the things that are causing your amygdala to fire off. A negative emotion is not just stress. It can be doubt. It can be fear. It can be anxiety. It can be confusion. And so by doing shadow work, you can work on this. And specifically in my workshops, I offer a lot of tools where people can pick the one that resonates the most with them and work on it. And I'm a huge advocate for therapy. Some people do need therapy. I'm not a therapist. And so if somebody needs a therapist, I recommend a therapist for them because I know that it's going to help them just like it helped me as well.
Absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of therapy as well. It's been transformative in my life. So I'm right there with you. I'm wondering, let's talk a little bit about I want to dig deeper into the shadow work, and I'm looking for a more, I mean, you gave the concrete example with Bethany. I'm thinking specifically about the concept that knowing is not actually half the battle. There's this saying, right? Knowing is half the battle. Well, this is now known as the G.I. Joe fallacy. You can know all the things. You can go on this journey of reflection and shadow work and exploration and journaling and you can sit through a workshop and gain this amazing knowledge, right? But knowing is not half the battle. There's some research that shows that it's like a tenth of the battle, right? Like it is the practice, the reps, the work, actually putting that knowledge into practice that gets you there. So, that being the main hurdle, how do you help people take the knowledge that you give them and these transformative ideas and help them implement it daily, even if, like you said, small baby steps, right? Into action, that they can build it into habits, and then all of a sudden it's just their default mindset. How do you get people there?
So it's interesting because, I mean, it's a great question, right? Knowing is half the battle. And you know, as a metaphor for the audience, it's almost like I can go see a trainer, or I can see, you know, maybe somebody who's trained in nutrition, and I can ask him, what can I do so that I have six-pack abs? Tell me what to do. And they'll tell you, they'll say, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. That's knowledge. That's being aware of what you have to do. But now you have to take that and actually do it so that you can have these six-pack abs and go through that type of transformation. And the same thing is true with mindset work. I can sit here and I can teach you how to do it, but unless you actually do it, you're not going to change. And every single person is different. And some people, they're ready to do it right now. Some people, it's going to take a long time before they're actually ready to do it, and it's okay. But what I tend to do in my own frameworks, and I have a program called The Neuroscience of Achieving Success, is that we have to start first by slowly changing your identity. And so how do you do that? Well, there's many ways you can change your identity. And it involves some very easy techniques and then some more advanced techniques for the person who's ready. So for example, some of the easier techniques, and I think I mentioned some of these earlier, is visualization. When you start to visualize yourself with six-pack abs, your brain starts to make this little shift that it's possible that that's you. And as you continue doing it every day and every day and every day and every day, and it starts to become more real. Okay, and so that's something simple that you can do. You can visualize it. You can say affirmations that I have six-pack abs. I have six-pack abs. However, even that's not enough. That allows you to sustain yourself during the process, but then you have to look at your belief system. Do I have any type of belief where that challenges my identity? And so, for example, some people may not. Some people grew up with a parent who they observed working out every single day. They were a bodybuilder. It might be easier for them to do it. It might be. And so you may have in your head, you know what, I can't do this because I'm too busy. I don't have time to cook. I have to order. And so all these beliefs start to kind of come out. But I have some really cool techniques on how to remove limiting beliefs. Now, there are many techniques on how to remove limiting beliefs. You can talk to a therapist, journaling. I have my own techniques on how to remove limiting beliefs. So one of those is called Master Freedom Code. And that's a methodology that I'm co-creating with Vinnie Tolman. And it's powerful because you start to see all of the reasons why that identity doesn't belong to you right now. And then you can do something about it during the session by reversing that. And it's very powerful. That's one technique. Sometimes beliefs are more intense because of the emotion that's attached to it. And so that's where certain techniques like mind wiping come in, because that technique literally removes an emotion from a memory. And now you don't get the anxiety that you were getting before when you thought about doing something new. And so when I work with my clients on how to go through that transformation, in other words, they get the information, now what do I do with it? Doing these techniques, removing limiting beliefs, removing negative emotions, doing the visualizations, doing the affirmations, it gets them closer and closer and closer to becoming that identity that they wish to be. And so that's what I love doing. I love doing that. And for some people, they're ready to do it right now and they change immediately on session one. Some people, it takes many sessions because we're all different. We all have different stories. And again, like I was mentioning, for some people, it's about planting a seed and planting a seed only before they actually make the change.
Can you talk a little bit more about either Master Freedom Code or this mind wiping for the audience and talk through what that technique actually looks like?
Sure, I'll talk about the Master Freedom Code. And the Master Freedom Code was introduced by Vinnie Tolman. Now, Vinnie Tolman is a really interesting individual. He actually died in his 20s, and he came back to life, I think about 45 minutes to an hour later, I think it was. And it was transformational for him because during this process, and I guess now we're getting more into the spiritual side of things, but he says he saw heaven, he saw angels, and when he came back, he now had this intuition that he didn't have before. And he felt like he could speak to people's angels. And so he became a coach. And people go to him in present day when they're having trouble in different aspects of their life, and he's able to feel their energy. And one of the things he started doing was writing this technique where he was helping people rewire essentially their thinking. Now, he would not describe it that way. I happen to, again, like I said earlier, I speak with different types of coaches. I've seen them all because I'm very open-minded, and I like things that are eccentric. I also like things that are very, very well documented. I do all of that because I'm a coach, and I look to expand my own mindset. But I met with him for some sessions, and he did this technique on me, and it worked. And it worked within that first session. It completely removed something that I had that I didn't think I could remove, and he removed it. And so him and I started talking, and I told him that I wanted to actually formalize that methodology and connect it to neuroscience, because from my own observations, I could tell why it was working from a neuroscience perspective. I've had enough training in neuroscience that I could just see it. And I thought, wow, like you have just uncovered something that I don't think most people realize actually happens. And so I took what he was doing, I created a framework out of it, I tied it back to the neuroscience aspect of it, and now I use it on my clients. And so essentially, you start off with understanding what is the limiting belief that the coaching client has. What is the limiting belief that they want to remove? And then through a series of statements, in other words, you say that limiting belief, and you ask the individual, what comes to mind when you hear this? Now, before we do all of that, they've taken several breaths in and out. We've gotten them into their subconscious mode. It doesn't take long to do that, a couple of minutes. And now these responses are coming from their subconscious. And during the exercise, I encourage people to say exactly what comes through. They may not understand what is coming through. So for example, they might hear the word toothpick. How in the world does toothpick relate to this limiting belief? They may not know it, but their subconscious has picked up on it. And behind that word is an entire experience. And there's energy behind that. By energy, I mean electricity, because our neurons, they produce electricity, as we learned in the neuroscience class at Wharton. And so all of this is explained through neuroscience, but they're able to pick up on certain sentences, certain words, certain images, sensations. They might be abstract in nature. The facilitator, they write it down. And they ask them again, when you hear the statement, I'm not enough, what comes to mind? And then all of a sudden they see the name of a street. that they lived in when they were 5 years old. I write the street down, Elm Street. What else comes to mind when you hear I'm not enough? And then all of a sudden they hear the name of their childhood friend in third grade. Okay, write it down. And so typically after saying the limiting belief about 15 to 20, and sometimes even up to 30 times, there's a pattern that's just been established. And all of this, the individual may know exactly how all of this now contributes to the limiting belief, or they still might not know how all of this contributes to the limiting belief, but the subconscious mind does. And so then I read it backwards to them. I read it completely backwards to them so that it's activating those memories in the brain. And then we do a visualization representing the opposite of I'm not enough. So that now the person starts to remember all of those memories, not as feeling I'm not enough, but feeling empowered and inspired, I am enough. And so now the brain picks up all those memories, those key memories, with a less intensity, because now it's seeing it through the lens of I am enough. And more than likely, the individual also has an understanding of how I am not enough came to be within their lifetime. And so it's a really powerful technique. And we typically have people rank themselves from 1 to 10. How intense do you feel this in your body? And then they rank it afterwards. How do you feel now? And then I encourage them 24 hours from now, how do you feel? Because you might even feel less. And then 40 hours, you might feel less. I have seen people go from feeling that a 10 of intensity as how intense they felt that in their body, I'm not enough, to then saying, I don't even feel that anymore in my body. I am enough.
Wow.
And so that's a really powerful technique that I've started to use on many of my clients, and they love it. I've had clients tell me that they've been to therapy for 2 years, and in a 30-minute session, we resolved something that that they couldn't resolve. Now, let me be clear. When I do this, I'm not asking anybody, tell me about that time that this thing happened. That's not for me. That's for therapy. The only thing I'm asking is when you hear the statement, what word comes to mind? What image comes to mind? What sentence comes to mind? What sensation? And I just write it down. I don't even know what it means. I
That
just
can
write
be
it down.
yeah, that can be so illuminating, though. I'm thinking of this quote from Carl Jung: until you make the subconscious conscious, it will run your life and you will call it fate.
And that's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is. I love that quote so much. It's what I'm thinking about because I know how hard it is and I know you know how hard it is. This is deep work. This is hard work. And as beautiful and transformative and inspiring as these moments of clarity can be, they're also equally as messy. And in my experience, the identity transformations that I've gone through have come with grief, a grief that I didn't expect, for kind of shedding the identity that I had before or the views that I had of myself or the world. And I'm curious, in your experience in coaching people, I'm sure they feel amazing, right? After, going on this journey and shedding these limiting beliefs. But have you ever experienced your clients having a sense of grief or almost a sense of loss in this transformation?
What's interesting is about 70% of the people that I do this to, they actually start crying at the very end of it.
Oh, wow.
Now, I don't know if they're crying out of grief, out of joy. I don't know if biologically the body's releasing maybe this energy, if you will, through the tears. I don't know. But an observation is that about 70% of the people who do this, they do cry at the very end. They do shed some tears at the very end, whether it's one tear or whether they need a moment. And I think it's really powerful. I think it's really powerful. So I don't know. I don't know if I would describe that as grief or loss. I don't think I would describe it that way. But it's more of a release that I see in people when this happens.
What was the feeling that you experienced when you were going through your moment of clarity and your transformative moment where you realized that you had all of these limiting beliefs? Like, what was the feeling? Was it excitement? Was it anger? Was it sadness, joy? What were you actually feeling as you were going through that?
I actually felt empowered. I felt empowered because when I met with that coach and she removed this limiting belief, which was I'm not enough, then once it was gone, I could clearly see why I was enough. And it was so obvious that I knew, wow, like, it's like I am enough. I can do this. I can absolutely do this.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, within 6 weeks of that, I was promoted. And the process to being promoted started literally the next day.
What did you do?
The
Like,
next day.
what was your action item? Once you had that breakthrough moment, how did you implement that in
What
practice?
happened is that a recruiter reached out to me from a different company and asked, are you interested in this role? And before that, I think I would have said, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for this role. Oh, I don't know if I'm enough for this role. But now, because I can see really clearly, it was obvious I am totally enough for this role. I can absolutely do this. I want to do this. This is the next step. And so I said, yes, I'm interested. She said, okay, let's interview. Went through a series of like 4 interviews and I got an offer. And I started, and I gave my company 2 weeks notice and I started within 2 weeks. It was fast. And
Yeah.
again, I talk about the reticular activating system. We talked earlier about noticing, maybe a crystal sitting on your desk or some feathers in the room, and you might have forgotten that they were there, and then you say, I've decided to find a feather or have a feather, and all of a sudden your mind is seeing it now. The same thing is true in opportunities. In opportunities, you now recognize an opportunity within a crowd. You recognize an opportunity within a statement that's been made. You now realize that there's something out there that aligns with your goal because you've made a decision to see it and experience it. And so for me, it was very much about empowerment. I felt empowered that, hey, I'm enough. I'm enough. I'm enough. And maybe my mind wouldn't even have noticed that email from that recruiter. Maybe I would have just clicked delete. But no, my mind now thought, oh, here's an opportunity to now become who I'm now ready to become. Because I wasn't ready for the promotion because my mind didn't think I could have it. And now that my mind thought I could have it, I realized that I had all the skills to be it and have it. And I became it.
Can you say more about I am enough and the concept of intrinsic worth and not measuring your worth extrinsically by, I know you mentioned you suffered from perfectionism. I like to call myself a recovering perfectionist. I'm I'm just wondering a little bit more about that. What was the shift from measuring your worth by output or the result, the productivity? And at what point did you shift? And what was that shift actually like? Telling yourself and believing it, not just faking it till you make it, actually believing that you are worthy and you are enough, and you're not just measuring that by what you were told growing up or by what your managers told you at work. Or I'm curious about that. Say more about that.
Well, it's interesting because, and I'll just share my own case. I was getting great productivity numbers. I was getting great quality numbers. In fact, a few days before I had the conversation with the coach, I mean, really the catalyst for me reaching out to the coach is that I had my performance review. And I was ranked number one out of all of the people at my level within the business unit. It was about 70 people. I was ranked number one. And yet during my performance review, I was told that I couldn't get a promotion because there was now a new HR policy that required somebody in my kind of role, which was a project manager, to be in Charlotte, North Carolina to be promotable. In other words, me as a project manager or a process design consultant, I could not move on to the next level unless I was actually working out of the headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so I have the numbers. I was number one. You have the numbers. Your bonus is going to reflect that, but we can't promote you because of this HR policy. And so that's where I had to think, because in those 6 years I was just thinking, oh, I got to improve my numbers. I got to do this. I got to do that. Make it better. Make it better. Make it better. Better didn't lead to anything, which is why I do this work. What led to transformation was releasing the belief that something was wrong with me, or that I wasn't enough, and I did that. I let it go. I completely let it go. Now, I'll tell you where it was coming from, just so that the audience knows. When I was hired as an MBA, it was interesting because most of the people that I worked with did not have MBAs. And so I would spend about 6 months to a year on a specific project, and then I would be moved to a different team within home loans. Every time I would be moved to a different team, it's because the department needed somebody who was flexible enough that could learn the processes quick enough to execute in that role. And so they saw me more as an internal consultant. I didn't know that. I just thought, oh wow, like I guess they're just moving me because they don't know who else to put over here, and they're just putting me in there. And then 6 months to a year later, I would be moved to a different role, a different team. 6 to 9 months, I would be moved to a new one. But for me, I would see everybody else, and no one else was moving. I was the one being moved around. And so even though I was doing a great job, I just kept thinking like, wow, like maybe I'm not doing a great job. I just started making all these things in my head. And then after I was able to clearly state I am enough, that's when I realized that, wow, this is the reason why they were moving me around, because I was the only person out of this entire group that had the intelligence, the flexibility, the resilience, and the ability to go into a new team, analyze the environment very quickly, services, products, customers, technology, and be able to actually succeed in projects. Now, was I ever the best one out of the people who have been there for 20 years? No, they always shined. The people who have been in that same role for 20 years, they always shined. And I never recognized that they shined so much because they had been there for 20 years. And I had been there for 3 months. But with time, what took them 20 years to reach this level, I mean, after a while, you plateau. I got there very quickly. And then I was able to see, wow, I was moved around, not because something was wrong with me. I was moved around because I was the only one person who could do it. And that was my value. And so even when you have the value, even when the metrics around productivity, quality show that you have the value, if you yourself don't see the value, then that's how you're going to experience your reality. Because there was never one point where I went to my leadership team and said, hey, I don't want to be moved around anymore. I want a promotion. If I'm going to do this role and this role and this role, I want a promotion. I never did that because I just figured that something else was going on. And look, I would never do it that way. I would never be that direct about it if I want a promotion. But I would have conversations around, hey, I want to be talked about, kind of, being moved around, and just understand where I see myself in this organization in the future, and if I can take more of a leadership role and managing a group. I never had that because I was always so stuck on getting that promotion and getting that promotion. And so that was my own fault. I take 100% ownership on that. It's easy for us to blame other people for things that are happening. And sure, there are times where we do have to advocate for ourselves so that way somebody else doesn't take our power away, because that does happen. But there are times that we give our power away without realizing it. And that's the piece I'm talking about, when we start to give our power away.
One thing I thought about as you were speaking is the concept of forgiveness. I know we talked about this when we first met, and forgiving others and forgiving yourself for not knowing, for a lot of things. I think of for not knowing the information that you know now back then. Can Can you say more about forgiveness and what you've learned about forgiveness in going through your own transformative journey and leading other people through transformational change?
Forgiveness is one of the most powerful things that anyone can do. One of the most powerful things that anybody can do. And I'm gonna share a really personal story that I don't think I've ever shared at any workshop. I started to have some health issues. I think it started around 2018, and it lasted a couple of years, where my entire head, my entire face would start to get red and more red and redder and redder and redder until my skin started to peel off. Almost like as if I had been sunburned. And it would feel as if I was sunburned. And it would happen at least once a month. It would last maybe about a week, and it just felt super uncomfortable. And it bothered me because I didn't look healthy. I didn't know what was going on. And during the COVID pandemic, I decided to talk to somebody about it. And they told me, the reason you're experiencing this is because you have not forgiven anybody in your life for things that they've done to you. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And so I said, well, what do I do? And they said, well, you take the time and you forgive them. Some of these people, you may actually want to call them and forgive them. And some of these people, you can just forgive by just saying it out loud. You know what? I forgive you now. I understand the truth about what happened. And so one of the techniques that you and I talked about recently was the reverse timeline technique, where you go back in time and you essentially capture moments of when you felt a certain way. And so I did that, and I captured moments that I felt angry or I felt hurt, but yet I never spoke up for myself because I didn't know that I could. I didn't know that I could advocate for myself. And I started to forgive every single person in my life. It took about 30 days for me to do this. There were people that I felt like I needed to call and tell them. And then there were people that I was able to do just by speaking it out loud because I felt comfortable doing that as well. And for at least for the people that I called and spoke with, I had a chance to share my thoughts around the situation. And in some cases, it revolved around, hey, I just want to let you know that because I care so much about you as a friend and because we are still friends today, I am doing this exercise because I haven't taken the time to do this and I need to do this. And so this may seem a little strange to you, but yes, there was an event 15 years ago where you did this or said this, and it did make me mad. I was mad, and I held it in all of this time, and I've kept it within. And I just want to let you know that is how I felt when that happened. And I choose to forgive you now. And more than anything, I choose to forgive myself because I did not speak up for myself. This is not an event that just happened that somebody did something to me. This happened and I didn't do anything back.
I'm so curious about how those conversations were received, right? Because you said some of these relationships are relationships that you still have today, and I'm just wondering how it landed when you're calling someone to say, you might not even remember this, right? But this impacted me so deeply to my core that I still remember it today. And I'm hanging on to it in my physiology, in my biology, that it's affecting me. And I'm so curious about how some of those conversations actually went and how the message landed and how the forgiveness actually unfolded as it was received.
So it's interesting because in some cases, the person did remember the situation and they said, you know, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to make you feel that way. In some cases, they explained the rationale around what happened. And then I realized that my mind wasn't filtering reality for what it really was. And I was seeing something that really wasn't true. In other words, in my mind, I saw it as them doing something that disrespectful, but then once I explained it, I realized, oh, my mind, I was just making that up in my head because of my reticular activating system. So I saw both examples. And in every example, it wasn't just about me forgiving them. It was also about me forgiving myself. I had to do that too because I chose to give my power away. No one can take your power away from you. Nobody. Unless you give it to them unintentionally or even intentionally. And again, I didn't do this for a lot of people. I think this was with really close, like for example, my mother, who I feel very comfortable talking to, my twin brother, who I've known the majority of my life, right? And so it made it a little bit easier, but it made us understand each other much better. And then I understood them better as well. And so I
So
realized
did
that
you,
I had some work to do too.
yeah, did your health improve after that? I feel like that was the physical manifestation of you holding on to feelings of anger and sadness, and that's wow. The power of forgiveness is
So this was happening to me for almost 2 years, at least once a month. After I did this, after 30 days, it never happened again.
wow.
Yeah, my face still gets red sometimes. I do suffer from allergies, but in terms of like it becoming bright red and feeling like it was like if I were sunburned and then it peeling off, like if I had been sunburned, that never happened ever again after that. And so to answer your question, I mean, forgiveness is very powerful. And in some of the techniques that I do teach, if the person's ready and the person wants to, we do go through a journey where we do this thing called the reverse timeline technique. And if they're ready, if they feel comfortable, they do forgive the person out loud. They do that. And then they forgive themselves. And they're able to do so because the things that happened to us in our past, we see them from the person who we were in the past. But with time, we have become wiser. And now we can see the same situation from a completely different lens of somebody who is wiser. And now we may see the situation just a little bit differently. So, for example, I can blame my mom about being stressed out when she came home this one day, or my dad when he came home this one day. But that was me looking at the situation from an 8-year-old. Now I'm in my 40s. I have a child. I understand, the real world a little bit better, and I will look back at it. And I'm like, you know what? They were just stressed out from work. They had nothing to do with me. They had nothing to do with me. They didn't do anything terrible.
Yeah, so relatable. I'm a new mom-ish. Our daughter just turned 1, and that's one of the things that I am feeling is just such a deep sense of forgiveness and empathy, existential empathy, right? Because there's just some things that you can't understand. You can't possibly understand until you are in it and you are living it yourself and you're walking in those shoes. Perspective, right? The beauty of perspective.
It's funny because I started an annual father-son trip. So my dad and myself and my brother, and I remember the very first father-son trip, which was in 2019. And I made a decision that I was going to talk to him about some things that really bothered me when I was a child, so like some things that he did that I didn't like, that I had held on to. And it's funny because I spent 5 minutes telling him all this, and then at the end he says, "You know what? I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it affected you that way. Like, I really apologize. Like, I didn't realize you had held on to this long. Like, I'm sorry." And after he said that, it's almost like it went away. And then I actually felt a little dumb because I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm a 39-year-old man telling my dad this about something happened to me when I was 6 or 7, and now that he says I'm sorry, it just felt so small and trivial that I thought, oh my gosh, why did I even bring this up? But it's okay because it needed to happen. It needed to happen to maybe show that, as fathers, maybe we do need to check in more with our kids and ask them, hey, how are you feeling? Like, are you okay? Did I do something? Is there anything I can do better? Maybe we do need to check in. And then as kids ourselves, maybe, if we feel comfortable doing so, maybe speak up. One of the things that I love about my daughter, especially when she was younger, is that she would always share her boundaries with me. And she would tell me, hey, Dad, like when you said that, like, I didn't like that. And I love that because I didn't have the power to do that. I felt like it was disrespectful to do that. But I've raised her mom and I have raised her where she feels comfortable doing that, and it allows her to have a better experience. And so forgiveness is one of the most powerful things anybody can do when they are ready, if they are ever ready. If they are ever ready. Because there's some things that are very simple in nature, and then there's some things that can be extremely traumatic, can cause PTSD. And so the road to forgiving something like that can be very difficult. And I would never tell somebody that they have to do that either.
Can you say more about all of these, your own transformational journey, and now leading other people through transformational change in your professional capacity? What has that taught you, or what does that look like in your role as a dad to your daughter? And I mean, clearly you've taught her boundaries. You've raised her with that, which is beautiful. I love that. But those lessons that you've learned in your professional capacity, how do those translate into your role as a dad and how you hope to raise her?
So definitely when you start to incorporate this into your career, you're going to start incorporating this into your everyday life. Because the truth is that we create this separation in our mind, but yet how we experience reality in our personal life creeps into our work life and vice versa. And so with my daughter, I was always very clear about being honest, asking her, hey, how are you feeling? And look, there was even one point where I mistook something that she was doing. She was young. She was probably maybe 5 years old. And she was doing something that I didn't like. And I gave her a very small spanking, one time, hey, don't do that. She didn't cry. She was actually surprised. And then it wasn't until later that night that I thought to myself, oh my gosh, like what I thought she was doing, that's not what she was doing. She was doing something else. In fact, she was copying me.
Oh
She
my
was
gosh, how did you feel in that moment? I would have felt terrible.
I will tell you that I love my daughter. We have an amazing relationship. The next morning, I woke up and I told her, this is what happened yesterday. I was wrong. I apologize.
Wow.
Please forgive me. She didn't say anything. She ran right up to me and gave me the biggest hug because I messed up. I messed up, and as parents, we don't go to school to learn how to become parents. And that was one moment where I messed up. And so I absolutely apply these lessons because I don't want her to develop this mentality that she can't come to her dad or that her dad doesn't understand her. And I just want to let her know, hey, I didn't understand what was going on. I see it now. I messed up. I
That's so
messed up.
important. I think that's so important to model that for our kids, that it's okay to make mistakes. Grown-ups mess up too, right? That's really beautiful that you're modeling that for her. I'm really wondering about you leading people through transformational change. One thing that I know that I have gotten stuck in is the devil you know versus the devil you don't, right? Uncertainty and almost being scared to try something new or to grow, to keep growing, right? Have you ever found with any of your clients or people that that is their version of stuck, right? You can have the growth mindset, you can know all the things, be equipped with all the knowledge, but you are stuck maybe out of a sense of fear or comfort, right? Have you ever experienced that? And what does that look like for your clients? And how do you lead them through that?
So, I think we talked a little bit about, being stuck out of fear. Well, actually, did we talk about it? Maybe we didn't.
We
Let me
glazed over being stuck, but we didn't really
yeah.
dwell on like fear. Yeah.
So this is what I have found as being the reasons why people get stuck. Number one, they're choosing to believe something about themselves or somebody else or a situation that's not true. Okay, they're choosing to believe something about themselves, somebody else, or a situation that is not true. In many ways, you can also call this a limiting belief or limiting beliefs. Number two, there are emotions that are negative in nature that have not been resolved, that are ready to be resolved. In other words, you've held on to it for so long that now that emotion is ready to come out and be resolved. These negative emotions are ones that you might be aware of, or you might not be aware that they are there because you've hidden them so deep that you don't even recognize that they're there. Of which some of that could be anger or sadness or fear, like you mentioned. The third reason why people get stuck is because they're not being 100% clear about what they want. Now, that happens for various reasons. Number one, they may just not know what's out there. Okay? They may be content with what they have, and they're like, I don't feel like I need to change. I'm happy with the way I am, even though other people are not happy with the way that they're acting, and a change is required. And then the other reason why I see number 3 is that you know exactly what you want, but somebody else has told you that you can't be that. And I tend to see that most with kids. And by kids, I don't mean like teenagers. I mean even adults where they're in their 20s and in their 30s. They've always wanted to do X, but a parent told them that, no, you need to do Y instead. And so now they're confused because they're leaning more here, and yet they're being told that they're not supposed to do that. And so then they become stuck because they're not pursuing their passion. So those are the 3 main reasons that I tend to see when somebody is stuck. They're choosing to believe something about themselves that isn't true, or something about somebody else, or something about a situation that's not true. There's a negative emotion or emotions that haven't been resolved, and now that's creeping into all stages of their life, preventing them from moving forward. Or number 3, they're not being 100% clear about what they want. And so depending on how the conversation goes with the coaching client, then it kind of determines how we address what might be happening. And I'll give you one of the craziest examples that I have ever seen. I have never seen an example like this since it happened. There was a client, and she came to me because she had been interviewing for jobs. And she wasn't getting any of the jobs. And she was frustrated. And so she came to me for interviewing coaching. I said, okay. So we started the mock session. And after 10 minutes, I said to myself, okay, this is not the issue. Like, she is a very good interviewer. She's believable. She's telling her truth of why she wants the role, why the company. This is not the issue. And I told her that. I'm like, something else is going on. And in many ways, she felt stuck. So we evaluated each one of these. Are you telling yourself something that's not true? Is there a negative emotion that you're aware of or maybe unaware of that hasn't been resolved, that now your body wants to resolve it? Or are you not being clear about what you want? Well, it was clearly number 2. And she said, well, you know what, there is. I'm like, okay, well, do you feel comfortable talking about it? Because maybe she does need to see a therapist, or maybe something we can resolve. And she basically said that it had been almost 14 years that she had not seen her dad, and that she felt guilty. And so that's the negative emotion, guilt. And I asked her, well, why do you feel guilty? And she said, well, I feel guilty because when I was 16 years old, I had my Sweet 16 celebration. All the guests were there. And I did not dance with my dad that night. I made a conscious decision to skip the daddy-daughter dance. Well, why did you decide to do that? Because I was really mad at him. He was, at the time he was divorced from my mom. He was dating this other woman. And then all of a sudden he tells my mother that he's going to take me out to this carnival. We get there and he shows up with another woman. Not with a girlfriend, with another woman and her son. And so he used me to essentially trick his girlfriend that he was going somewhere with his daughter when he was actually meeting up with this other lady. And I'm furious about it. He used me. That was messed up. But what happened is that shortly after the Sweet 16, her dad disappeared. He disappeared. She didn't know where he was, what happened, and subconsciously she blamed herself because the 16-year-old version of herself thought he was so hurt from me not dancing with my dad during the daddy-daughter dance that he probably felt that I didn't love him anymore and he disappeared. So we did an exercise. We did an exercise for her to release the guilt. And she did. And she cried, and she cried, and she cried for 3 days straight.
Wow.
Within 30 days, after not having that guilt, she landed her job. But there's
That's
something I haven't
incredible.
shared with you yet
Mhm.
that's even more interesting. Do you want to guess what happened 3 days after that exercise?
No, her dad reappeared. Stop it right now. Oh, that's wild.
And the story, and so what she basically learned was that he actually disappeared because he was actually deported. He was just doing bad things back then. I think he was selling drugs or something. He was doing something that he wasn't supposed to be doing, and so he got deported. Um, and and he definitely did tell her mom where he was and what happened. But once he was back in his country, he did tell her mom where he was and what happened. But her mom, to protect her daughter from this man who was obviously not behaving in a way that she felt was appropriate for her daughter, to protect her, she didn't tell him that she knew where he was. She
Oh,
wanted to keep her daughter
no.
safe.
Oh my goodness. I bet that was a whole forgiveness journey in and of itself.
Yeah. But it's
Wow.
interesting because like it goes back to what I said, that why do people get stuck? Limiting beliefs, negative emotions that haven't been resolved, or not being clear about what you want at a high level. And even though that has nothing to do with career, it creeps into career. And for her, that is what she needed to resolve to now be able to move into the next phase of her life. Because even though she didn't recognize that she needed it, her subconscious did. And her subconscious was self-sabotaging her opportunities because of that guilt that she carried. And that guilt was ready to be processed. And the
Mhm.
only way that you can release an emotion, because you hear people say, "Oh, well, just let it go, let it go, let it go." The only way you can let go of something is if you actually take the time to process it, of which you may not be ready to. You may not be ready to. And now she was ready to, and she did it. She processed it, and her dad appeared, which again that goes into a completely different conversation,
Yeah.
maybe different type of podcast, but I mean it shocked me.
Yeah. What a powerful story. And you're right. We could totally go down a rabbit hole and that could totally be its own podcast episode. We'll put a pin in that and we may very well be circling back to that one. Um, I'm wondering on the third point, in people not being clear about what they want, and in keeping with the theme of Lucid Commons and this concept of clarity, what is one tip or technique or skill or idea that you can give the audience that they can do right now to get clear about what they want?
Well, you can talk to a coach just like I did.
All right, we're
I
plugging
mean,
Javier's coaching here. Yes,
I
yes.
mean that
Plug
I
it.
did it. I did it, and that's what allowed me to see something that I couldn't see within myself. Because if you're stuck, you're not going to see it. And
Hmm.
so,
Hmm.
speaking to a coach can really help you. It
Hmm.
can
I
absolutely
agree.
help you because
Yeah,
that's
I
what a coach
will.
is supposed to do. A coach is
Yes,
supposed to get you from here to here,
yes,
and they have the skills on how
absolutely.
to do it.
Absolutely. I will 100% back that up. I have a growth mindset. I know all the things, not all the things, but all the the self-awareness and the communication books and the reflection and I journal and I go to therapy and I do all the things, right? Um, I got stuck and I sought a coach. And our work over the course of 3 months completely transformed my life. I launched this podcast because of my work with her,
There you go.
right? And it shed some of the limiting beliefs that I had about myself. So I will 100% back you up there. Coaches are incredible. And even if you're somebody who is, self-aware, is good at self-regulation, you're in therapy or you think you know all the things, there's always more to learn, right? Let's be humble, let's have some humility here and recognize your weaknesses. For me, it was recognizing I get stuck in the execution. And I spend so much time thinking, maybe too much time thinking, right? Thinking and reflecting and journaling. And I get stuck in analysis paralysis. And I was getting stuck in the perfectionism mindset. and that was keeping me from moving forward. Right. So now I've kind of internalized this progress over perfection. Done is better than perfect. 20 minutes of just doing the thing is better than 20 hours preparing to do the thing. And that was a huge transformational perspective that I got from my work in coaching. So I will 100% back you up. Like, yes, coaching is a fantastic tool. I know we're coming up on our time here, and I'll give you a moment. Just anything that I haven't asked you about, or anything that you wanted to say today.
Well, I mean, one thing I definitely do want to say as we talk about identity level transformation is that it does require people to do the work to understand who they are. Why do I do what I do? What's my story? What are my limiting beliefs? What are emotions I haven't dealt with? Am I being honest with myself? One thing I will mention is that AI is here to stay. And we have already entered a space where AI is taking the roles of many people. And this is a time period where many people are going to start questioning their own identity and where they fit in this society, in their reality. And so I encourage people to really start doing the work now. Who are you? What is your story? What are your limiting beliefs? Where are your blocks? And how can you resolve those? Because as we go through AI, we're going to experience an exponential shift in how people work. Mm-hmm. And many people are going to have to recreate themselves. And so this is the time. This is the time to start focusing on mindset, because if you don't, you're going to find a technology taking over essentially you. In other words, even if your role doesn't change, you might start losing the pieces of yourself that make you you when you give recommendations. AI is here to help you do things, but if you only take what AI gives you, and you don't take the time to incorporate your story, your why, your experience, your expertise, your superpowers into that, you yourself are now turning into a robot. And that is not why you're here on this planet. You're on this planet to share your gifts with the world. Use AI to make things faster. Mm-hmm. When Excel started to, when they had the macro function where you were able to do things much quicker, or doing pivot tables, I mean, that reduced 10 hours worth of work. The same thing is happening now. But are you going to allow yourself to get lost within that process, or are you going to embrace it? And one of the best ways to start embracing it is for you to understand exactly who it is that you are. Mm-hmm. Understanding that more will be revealed to you as time goes by. But a lot of the workshops that I'm doing now are actually integrating AI into the actual lessons themselves, because it's important to recognize that, as AI continues to grow, it's going to be important that you continue to grow with it.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought up AI. I've been thinking a lot about AI lately, and how it's going to force, I think, mass identity transformation at scale. And I think there's a level of course, fear and uncertainty, and thinking about earlier how I said the devil you know versus the devil you don't. I think there's something to be said for people who are ready for change and ready for growth, and people who are forced into change and forced to grow, and their back's against the wall, and they have to. And I'd be curious, last thought here, if you have any thoughts on being ready and choosing growth and choosing change versus someone who is forced to change and forced to grow. And what could you say to that person? I mean, I know you're saying basically get ahead of it, right? But what could you say to that person that feels that change is just being thrust upon them?
It's interesting because, this can be an hour-long conversation as well. It's simply because, change adoption is a huge topic right now, especially around AI. And a lot of companies are still trying to figure out the best way to implement AI and how to create this change adoption. And so one thing I can mention is that these are some of the things that we talked about today. Speak up. Share, what are your boundaries? Set your boundaries. AI works because of the data that's being fed to it. Does the data reflect your point of view? Does it reflect your story? Does it reflect your why? And if it doesn't, why not? Have a voice. Speak up. A company's customers might reflect your values, and so speak up. What is this really improving? Is it making things better? And then on the other hand, also be open to change, because realize that none of us grow unless we're open to change. If we're not open to change, we will never evolve. And I think the best metaphor is a butterfly. A butterfly doesn't start off as a butterfly, right? It goes through, this process of being, a caterpillar, and then the cocoon and all that stuff, and then it becomes what it has to become, right? And so, are you opening yourself up to change as well? Because it's going to happen. We're not going to go back. It's going to happen. And so, are you taking the steps now to know who you are? What are your values? What do you stand for? What is your brand? What is your why? What is your story? Have you done the shadow work, to see reality the way you're seeing it right now? Is there a better way to see it so that way you evolve quicker? So that when the question is presented to you, hey, how would you integrate AI into your workflows? You can say something. Because simply saying, oh, I don't want to do it, is not an effective answer. It's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so are you going to be part of the change, or are you going to get lost in it? And many people are getting lost in it.
If not now, then when, huh? Javier, I want to close in asking you to finish the line, because I knew you. Have you ever seen Wicked?
Yeah.
Okay, so because I knew you, I have been changed for good. And to me, that's just such a powerful line, because in thinking of my life and the people that I've come in contact with who have shaped who I am and have been part of my growth journey, it's so beautiful when you think about how just one person can completely change how you see yourself or how you see the world. And you had that experience, right, in coaching, and now you do that for other people. So I'm wondering if you could think of somebody that you have had an interaction with in your life who has touched you and said something to you that changed how you view yourself or how you view the world, and finish the line, because I knew you.
So because I knew this coach by the name of Sarah Meredith in 2016, it completely freed me from the cage that I did not realize that I was in. And so here I was, a recent MBA grad, an engineer, doing amazing work at a corporation, and yet I was stuck. And if I can get stuck, anybody else can too. But I thank her, because she taught me that our minds can very much be a cage. And by doing the work and getting to know ourselves better and understanding what blocks we may have, to understand what emotions are triggered when things happen, to honor our authenticity. When you do that, you get a special key. You get this key where you unlock that door to that cage, and you allow yourself to free yourself and to fly. And so I think that's why we're all here on this planet, to be honest with you. I think we're all here to learn lessons, to process things, ideas, and to help other people along the way. And so I thank her for being that key that allowed me to uncage my mind and become the person I've become today, and am continually becoming as well. So,
Javier, thank you for the gift of this conversation, truly, and thank you for joining me on Lucid Commons.
Thank you so much.
Until next time.